All right, at this time, we will call to order the City of Kenai Planning and Zoning Commission meeting for December 8th, 2021. Will you stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, please.
Chair Tweet,
Here.
Commissioner Halstead is absent. Commissioner Woodard,
Here.
Commissioner Greenberg,
Here.
Commissioner Douthat,
Here.
Commissioner Springer, absent, and Vice Chair Fikes.
Here.
You have a quorum.
All right, thank you. And if I could, on the agenda, because I'm not sure how long we may have on the unfinished business item, if we could move the two new business items ahead of unfinished business on our agenda, and then we'll tackle it from that direction. If everyone's good with that, I would entertain a motion, please. Vice Chair Fikes.
I'd like to make a motion that we move the new business in front of the unfinished business.
I'll second.
And then approve the agenda as revised, correct?
And approve the agenda as advised.
All right. Is there any objection? Seeing none, the agenda is approved. Item A4, consent agenda. Commissioner Greenberg.
I move to approve the consent agenda.
Have a second?
Second.
Any objection? Seeing none, the consent agenda is approved. Item C, scheduled public comment. We have none. Item D, unscheduled public comment. Anyone wishing to speak to an item not on tonight's agenda?
If there's anyone on Zoom, you can unmute at this time.
We're going to have Councilman Glendenning come up, it looks like, first.
Vice Mayor.
Oh, Vice Mayor. I'm going to have to get used to that.
That's all right. Jim Glendenning, 694 Sycamore Circle, Vice Mayor, City Council, City of Kenai. Just briefly, I'll speak to one item that was managed at the Borough Assembly meeting last night, and that was the membership and apportionment of Planning Commission members for the borough. And the short of it was, and I'll just read from the memo we had and then amplify from that. I'll just read the last paragraph here. As a city with the largest population in the borough, it is important that the City of Kenai has representation on the borough's Planning Commission and not be required to share a rotating seat. Reestablishing the city seat lost by enactment of Ordinance 2016-25 substitute by reestablishing these seats and clarifying that the commissioner serving on a city seat must be a city resident and the list have at least one name and is in the best interest of the residents of Kenai as well as the greater Kenai community. Those words probably encompass the theme and theory of the debate last night. And without getting into the weeds, telling how we made sausage, what was finally decided is that each of the first-class home rule cities will have a guaranteed seat. The number of planning commissioners for the borough will increase to 14. So there's 5 first-class home rule cities, and then what will happen is that there will be seats lining up with assembly districts. Okay, and that seemed to be the most linear, easier way to have representation for everybody and get in with the protocols and guidelines of Title 29 of the state of Alaska. So what will happen is that we will have, of course, our own seat. As it impacts us, if you do the numbers, we're entitled. We're 1/8 of the population of the borough, and so we're entitled to over 1.5 seats. All we're asking for, and all we're reasonably expecting, is just one seat. And So how it impacts us is that in the assembly, we actually share a representative with the village of California Beach. And part of our precinct number 3 is Britt Hibbert, okay? So the way that will shake out is that because it lines up with assembly districts, that seat will be considered an at-large seat and would preferentially go to someone in that area, K Beach area. But that representative cannot be a resident of the city of Kenai, and that's the compromise that we made, and it seemed reasonable. That way, the borough at large will have representation, and we will have our guaranteed seat, and we will go forward. Also, there was discussion without going too long here that there was a serious amendment made that if someone was a planning commissioner for a city, a mayor, or a councilman, they could not serve on the planning commission, and that was defeated handily. And it was pointed out that the bench, the training for the planning commission at the borough comes from planning and zoning commissioners, city councilors, and that cadre of people. So without going any further, we will be represented, and we will have an increased population on the planning commission for the borough. It'll go from 11 to 14, and seats will be filled. The council from each first-class home rule city will approve a member, or a list of 1 or 2, 3, whoever is best qualified. We have to have someone that meets the minimum standards for borough participation, because they have their own requirements too. That list will be forwarded to the mayor. He'll pick one, and we'll go to the assembly for their final confirmation, which is how it had been done before. So any questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak to an item not on the agenda? Doesn't appear so. All right, then we will move on. Item E, consideration of plats, and F, public hearings. We have none, and that will move us to item H first, which is Resolution PZ 2021-41, granting a request for a transfer of a conditional use permit for the use of a hotel, guide, and boat parking in the rural residential zone to Wild Kenai Adventures LLC, 1105 Angler Drive, Lot 6, Anglers Acres, Subdivision Part 3. Can I get a motion, please? Vice Chair Fikes.
I'd like to make a resolution to approve PZ 2021-41.
And do we have a second?
Second.
Second. All right, staff report.
Thank you, Chair Twait and fellow commissioners. This presentation is on PZ 2021-41. It's a conditional use permit transfer for 1105 Angler Drive. Blue Heron Enterprises LLC holds a conditional use permit to operate a hotel, guide, and boat parking in the rural residential zone at 1105 Angler Drive. The city received an application to transfer the permit to Wild Kenai Adventures LLC. On November 22nd, 2021, the transferee submitted an application for transfer of conditional use permit to follow Kenai Municipal Code KMC 1420-157A, requiring an application for transfer in writing. Brief analysis, KMC 1420-150L5 states the following on transfers of conditional use permits. On transferability, a conditional use permit is not transferable from one parcel of land to another. Conditional use permits may be transferred from one owner to another for the same use, but if there is a change in use on the property, a new permit must be obtained. There are no outstanding conditional use permit code violations for 1105 Angler Drive, and therefore the conditions of PZ 0526 are considered being met. The new permit holder would continue to operate under the terms and conditions of the original conditional use permit of PZ 0526, and there will be no change in use. Staff's recommendations is the transfer of conditional use permit PZ 526 for hotel, guide, and boat parking meet the requirements of KMC 1420-150L5 and 1420-157A. City staff recommends approval of the transfer of conditional use permit PZ 05-26 subject to the following conditions. And I am going to go ahead and I'm going to read through these 6 conditions. And so these would be conditions of the transfer. They would go along with those that are already conditions for PZ 0526. Condition 1, further development of the property shall conform to all federal, state of Alaska, and local regulations. Condition 2, a yearly conditional use permit report must be submitted to the City of Kenai prior to the 31st day of December of each year. Condition 3, the applicant will meet with city staff for on-site inspections when requested. Condition 4, if there is a change of use for the above described property, a new conditional use permit must be obtained pursuant to 1420-150L5. Condition 5, pursuant to KMC 1420-150L2, this permit shall expire automatically upon termination or interruption of the use for a period of at least 1 year. And Condition 6, all conditions of PZ 05-26 will be met. That concludes my presentation. I do believe the applicants from Wild Kenai Adventures LLC are on the call, just in case there's any questions about the application. That completes my presentation. Happy to stand for questions.
All right. I don't think. Well, I guess we'll wait and see if we have any questions for them, but we'll bring it back here for any discussion. Anybody have any comments or questions or discussion?
Just one question, possibly for staff.
Commissioner Dothert, go ahead.
These lots, these are the, looks like from the rest of the literature, these are the previous high-low charters properties that are kind of adjacent to each other. Are they still going to be operated as high-low charters, or is it now Wild Kenai Adventures operating a whole different business name? Or
Mr. Foster.
Through the chair, Commissioner Douthat, the application is for Wild Kenai Adventures LLC, but actually maybe a good question.
I was understanding. I thought Blue Heron was operating it as high-low charters, but maybe I could be mistaken.
Yeah. I think. I guess the question would be in the transfer. I believe it's to transfer to Wild Kenai Adventures LLC, though I'd actually like to confirm whether they were going to include DBA high-low charters.
Yeah,
that might be a good question, because actually that's not how it's currently in the resolution. Right now it's just a Wild Kenai Adventures LLC.
Okay, and that's where I was confused.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. So maybe if the applicant for the transfer is out there, maybe they can shed some light for us.
Yes, hi, thank you for having us tonight. Our sale and purchase is contingent upon the CUP transfer. So as soon as that goes through, we do plan on doing a DBA high-low.
Okay. Mr. Foster.
Thank you, Chair Tway. So then, perhaps we actually let me go to the resolution, because I don't think that's
on page
how
41. It talks about it in the last paragraph. It does do high-low. I just didn't see it in the other paperwork.
So it could be that the recommendation might be to change the resolution to say Wild Kenai Adventures LLC DBA high-low charters.
That would be fine with us.
Okay, that would be
Okay.
my recommendation.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. I just to clarify that. Thank you.
Good catch. Any other comments? All right. Seeing none, we'll please call the roll.
Commissioner Woodard? Yes. Commissioner Greenberg?
Yes.
Commissioner Dothert?
Yes.
Vice Chair Fikes?
Yes.
Chair Twait?
Yes.
Motion passes.
All right, then we will go to item H2, Resolution PZ 2021-42, granting a request for a transfer of conditional use permit for the use of a hotel short-term recreational rentals in the rural residential zone to Wild Kenai Adventures LLC, 1230 Angler Drive, Lot 1, Block 2, Angler's Acre Subdivision, Addition Number 1, Part 2. Can I get a motion, please? Vice Chair Fikes.
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion that we approve PZ 2021-41.
4-2.
42, sorry, 42.
All right, we have a second.
Second that.
Commissioner Dothett seconds. All right, staff report.
Thank you, Chair Twait and fellow commissioners. My presentation is on PZ 2021-42, conditional use permit transfer for 1230 Angler Drive. Blue Heron Enterprises LLC holds a conditional use permit to operate a hotel, short-term recreational rentals in the rural residential zone at 1230 Angler Drive. The city received an application to transfer the permit to Wild Kenai Adventures LLC, and perhaps we just add the same for this resolution as well, DBA High-Low Charters. On November 22nd, 2021, the transferee submitted an application for transfer of conditional use permit to follow Kenai Municipal Code 1420-157A, requiring an application for transfer in writing. Staff's analysis is that there are no outstanding conditional use permit code violations for 1230 Angler Drive, and therefore the conditions of PZ 0684, PZ 01-11 are being met. The new permit holder would continue to operate under the terms and conditions of the original conditional use permit, PZ 06-84, parentheses PZ 01-11. There will be no change in use. Staff's recommendation is the transfer conditional use permit PZ 06-84, parentheses PZ 01-11 for a hotel, short-term recreational rentals meets the requirements of KMC 1420-150L5 and 1420-157A. City staff recommends approval of the conditional use permit PZ 06-84, parentheses PZ 01-11, subject to the following conditions. I'm going to go ahead and read these conditions. Condition 1, further development of the property shall conform to all federal, state of Alaska, and local regulations. Condition 2, a yearly conditional use permit report must be submitted to the City of Kenai prior to the 31st day of December of each year. Condition 3, the applicant will meet with city staff for on-site inspections when requested. Condition 4, if there is a change of use for the above described property, a new conditional use permit must be obtained pursuant to 1420-150L5. Condition 5, pursuant to KMC 1420-150L2, this permit shall expire automatically upon termination or interruption of the use for a period of at least 1 year. And Condition 6, all conditions of PZ 06-84, parentheses PZ 01-11 will be met. That concludes my presentation. Happy to stand for questions.
All right, we have a motion on the floor. Any discussion? And I guess I think probably pretty easy housekeeping, but I'll ask the applicant if they have anything they would like to add.
We do not. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, so looks like no further discussion.
I'd just like
Commissioner
to
Dothett.
tell the applicants good luck, and I'll be voting in favor of this, and I'm glad to see that they're going to be maintaining that name. That name's been around a long time. It's part of the history of that area of the river for sure.
Absolutely. All right. All right, we'll go ahead and call the roll.
Commissioner Greenberg?
Yes?
Commissioner Dothett?
Yes.
Vice Chair Fikes?
Yes.
Chair Twait?
Yes.
And Commissioner Woodard?
Yes.
Motion passes.
All right, now we'll back up to item G. Under unfinished business is Resolution PZ 2021-39, recommending the Council of the City of Kenai approve and adopt the City of Kenai Land Management Plan. And this was postponed from our last meeting, so we have a motion. And at this time, what I'd like to do is open it up to anyone that would like to come forward, open up the public testimony. Please come forward and state your name and address for the record, please.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Bob Malloy. I'm 513 Ash Avenue. My residence. I'm also a business owner, 110 South Willow, Kenai. I want to first thank Vice Mayor Glendenning and Councilmember Winger for trying to get some more time for public outreach and public comment on the plan at the last council meeting. Appreciate that. In addition to the comments that I made last time, I want to say that I think the land management plan is a really good thing for Kenai. It's a good tool for anyone who's researching, wanting to research city-owned lands. I'm still talking about the draft because that's the only one that I have. I haven't seen anything else yet. I think that is a comprehensive document as far as a tool for researching, kind of like an inventory, as Vice Mayor Glendenning said at the last meeting. It's incomplete, and what I mean by that, it doesn't include policies and procedures for how, when, and what the properties that are listed for disposal are going to actually get there, so there's in our code, that you're going to look at, Title 22 doesn't really either. It has ad hoc about how you apply. If you want to lease or you want to buy property, but so there's like a gap between an inventory and how you do that as to when and how and what land is going to be available. Because of that gap, it kind of looks like there's like a sign, everything's for sale of half the property in Kenai, which really isn't a way to go. So that's why I'm saying it's incomplete. Another example of that, and I talked about this last time, is there's some properties that have had a long history of contention in the city, and some of those are listed for disposed. And so one thing I recommended was maybe there would be another category, like to be determined for that, because it's certainly going to drop in your lap. But as opposed to saying right from the beginning that's the decision about this. So, other municipalities do have more code or policy and procedure about how, when, and what, how to get there in that gap. And so the commission certainly should be involved in that. So, hopefully you'll be recommending that part of the plan. So there's a real management plan, would be developed, and that's something that could be, developed over time. Again, just wanted to reiterate that I as I said last time, I thought that it was a little bit inadequate on ongoing evaluation of city lands for future needs and also potential acquisition of lands that the city might need. So that's what I had. Those are my other comments. Thank you very much for considering that. Appreciate it.
All right, see if anyone has any questions for you. Okay, well, I do. I got just one, I guess. So in regards to the procedures and how to dispose of the ones that are set up for or deemed to be disposed, what do you think? That seems like that's a council decision only, maybe? And maybe I'm wrong, but I don't know that we could do anything in guiding that ship, unless I would love to hear your opinion on that.
Well, I think you would, because you're planning commission, that you should be involved in that, because some of the properties obviously are wouldn't really, although they have disposed, they're not really available, because they're going to require a subdivision or a lot of other work or something, and some that they're saying are disposed, you're just inviting somebody into a big snafu, so I think that you would. Here's sort of an example. There's within the airport reserve there's those lease lots that are on the other side of the basin, okay? And those are being promoted regularly because the city wants people, they know they want those to be developed, and they know they want business there. So, they've already been promoting them in Anchorage at airfares and stuff like that. So what's not clear from this is there particular properties? Is there an agenda? Is there like particular properties that are going to be promoted or should be promoted, or not, or how do you get to that? You know, I guess is sort of part of it. You know, and I do think that the commission does have a role in that, just like you had a role in, you know, when everything came down about commercial marijuana business and the development of the regulations for that, and the zoning and where that would happen started with the commission and then ultimately was approved by the council. So it's kind of a long-winded answer, but I do think you guys are important, especially, and I don't think you're used enough in the planning aspect of planning for the city. And this is a big deal, especially, you know, because we have a finite amount of land, and you know, you want your grandchildren and your grandchildren's grandchildren to still have opportunity. So.
Okay, yeah, like I said.
I don't know if that answered your question.
Well, you know, well, you know, kind of, I guess. But yeah. I guess what I see is that all the commissions were tasked with the same project, you know, to go through it, make any recommendations. Now, planning and zoning may have more to say on some of these things, but I don't know that that's what we've been asked to do. And so I guess that's where, in my testimony last week at council, was just simply that I think we can move at our own paces with this thing, and some may take longer than others. But if the goalposts are changing a little bit and we're going to be asked more, then I think administration would have to give us that.
You know, I don't disagree that you haven't been asked, you know, about the gap I'm talking about or other things to really make a land management plan that's a real plan. I agree that you haven't been asked to do that. All I'm saying is, I guess I'm saying you should be asked, you know, and I think that, you know, you're statutorily and in code, the planning commission's a really important commission, and you have, you do some those that, you know, the council doesn't do, especially what you just did now earlier with the approving the transfer of those permits. You know, our city's always not been the best at doing planning. We've done a lot of stuff ad hoc, and I think the planning function of the planning commission hasn't been adequately supported. You know, and I think that it should be. So that's.
Well, I appreciate your opinion and logic on the situation, so thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Mr. Dothett might have something for you now.
So with the changing of the code and direction as far as how we would dispose of stuff, that's more of changing the city code and not this actual plan that's here. That's where I would think that you would take that up as far as, I mean, yes, that's part of this in a broader scope, is that after we've decided that these, as this document here is written, retain, dispose, or whatever, and then if we want to change how the code is written or fill some gaps in the code of how we're going to advertise now that these are being disposed of, are we supposed to be putting the city code in this and changing, and all that's supposed to be in this, is my confusion, is because the way I understand it, we have a inventory here, and we're discussing the inventory, and we just keep adding on to this inventory of different aspects that, yes, they relate back to this, but in general, we're initially just talking about this document. We can add codes and other procedures on how to do those kind of things when it comes to that section of the codes, not just the, what I'm looking at is this here. Do I want to get rid of it? Do I think this lot needs to be retained or gotten rid, or should we dispose of it? These are the reasons they said. Do I agree with that? Yes or no? And that's where I'm looking at on this document. And that's kind of where it just seems like we're adding outside the scope of this particular document. But yes, they pertain to this document in a way, and I'm not disagreeing with that. And I see what you're saying is, are we just going to hand this document to every real estate agency in town and say, go forth and conquer? Or how do we need to do that? Or should we have black and white, okay, now when it's disposed of, this is the code and this is how the steps it's going to be. I'm not sure that that's what needs to be in this particular document, or if that's something that could be taken up, addressed in a different manner or not. And that's kind of a roundabout. What I'm trying to get at is just, are we looking at this document, or are we adding a separate document for a separate piece of code that's going to be in a separate area?
So I understand where you're coming from, and sort of like, I don't really disagree. You know, what I'm saying is this says it's a land management plan, and I'm saying from a planning perspective, it's incomplete. You know, because it doesn't do some of those things. So so you know, either the plan itself does get developed over time to include those things that aren't there now, like how you go about you know, on assessing what the needs are for the city for the future, you know, or the and how you prioritize what city-owned lands, you know, are available or might be available 10 years from now or whatever than that, you know. Some of that gap, if it's not in here, you know, eventually it could be in here, or it could be in policies and procedures, or it could be in code, because the code doesn't go there either, you know, when you look at Title 22. So I'm just pointing out that those are deficiencies that I see in the current draft. You know, if you had more time, you know, then you might be able to, and I think you should, regardless, have some input into the planning part of that. You know, and how the council goes about doing that, you know, I don't know, and I don't have any voice in that. I'm just saying that I think that that needs to be done at some point, and as part of the planning, and that your commission should be part of that more so than, say, you know, some other commissions that don't have the planning function and don't have the land function that you do. And you know, and again, I think that our planning function's not been adequately supported by the city council, and that's my bad too, you know. But
And
so I don't know if that.
Yeah,
that
I see what you're saying, and where I'm seeing, I'm getting a lot of, it seems like there's just so much confusion on what, and I think, and this might just be me reading into it, and what I'm hearing over and over again, it might just be simple as we change the name and we make a plan on how we're going to dispose of this inventory. And there's maybe a separate actual plan, and that this is just the inventory document determining what lands are available, and that maybe it's not. This isn't really a land management plan. This is a land management inventory. And that the plan could be a separate document that's going to have the city codes and those kind of things in it. Or are we wanting to add all the code and all that to this document, which in turn doesn't list really any of that in here? It has none of that in here.
And I agree that this is a really good tool. You know, it's a good tool for people that want to find out information on city land. There's some, you know, there's some parcels that have some inadequate information. That's stuff that, you know, the administration can fix with all the comments that they get. And yeah, you know, that's another way to approach it. But I definitely wanted to identify, you know, gaps that I think, and you know, encourage you guys to think about that, and say that I think you should be involved in the planning of it eventually, because you're being acknowledged here with all the other commissions, you know, under the acknowledgements page, or especially being acknowledged. You know, city council, planning and zoning commission, city staff, and then a special thank you to other people, and, you know, not the other commissions. And I guess that itself is a recognition of, you know, the importance of you guys in this process. So, and hey, I appreciate the dialogue and the opportunity to have it with you.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I'm just,
So
yeah, I understand.
thanks for
Yeah, no problem. Thank you.
thanks for allowing the dialogue, which a lot easier to happen with a work session, But
Well,
I appreciate you letting me do this.
absolutely. Anyone else?
Christine Schmidt, 513 Ash Avenue. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. Let me make my babbling. um, to me, the problem with this is that it's not just an inventory. If that were true, that'd be fine. I wouldn't have any problem with it. Although there are some mistakes in which I'll bring up in a minute. The problem is that it is a disposal. It is a plan to dispose of property, and I don't think we're there yet. One problem I've always had with city property is the ad hoc way that you can buy city land here, which is basically it's first come, first served. I mean, there's sort of a process to it, but it's not well thought out in the sense of, is this something good for us to sell, or should we keep this for something? It's not a very organized process, and I think this sort of perpetuates that, which is, the administration has given you their recommendations, and they've really asked you to bless it. If you look on page 5 of the plan, you can see that your name's here, like you're blessing this, including all of their recommendations. And I think that my suggestion would be to recommend the inventory, but table the disposal recommendations till you have more information about how that process is going to happen, so that you have a real land management plan instead of just, okay, the green light, all the cities for sale, let's go. Some kind of real plan about how, I mean, there are discussions in here about, well, this looks good for this or that, but you don't really have a plan to do that. And you don't, other than to dispose of it when it says dispose. So when you're talking about such a large amount of property, I think it deserves more consideration than let's just put everything we don't want to keep into the disposal pot and call it good. So I would say that, well, first of all, I hope you will have a work session where you could actually go over some of these properties, because it's interesting and important to look at them in detail, but it's a 260 pages. So, and also for us in the public, there's not much of a chance to have a dialogue with you other than this 3 minutes we get, so we can't really have a dialogue, and that's a problem too. So this commission format is awkward to have a real dialogue with members of the public. So I want to point out 3 things mistakes that I found, which is map 32, page 158, parcel number 047-05216. That's a long, thin lot on Walker Lane. That is actually, the plat has restrictive notes on it, and that's not in the description. It does have, the original plat has restrictive notes that reserve the plat reserve that lot for the benefit of the subdivision lot owners across the street. So that's something that it's not developed, at this time, it's not available because it has that plat restriction on it. So I don't know why that isn't discussed. Number 2, as Bob pointed out, map 31, page 154, lot 045-01003, also referred to as lot and acres. That has a long, bitter history, and it's caused a lot of divisiveness in our community. And just to throw it out there that, once again, and so the people in our city have fought many times with the city over that piece of property, and have tried hard to get it to where it is now, zone conservation. And I think it's important that that history be acknowledged, and also the fact that basically it was sold to the people in the subdivisions behind it as it was a quid pro quo as a buffer for those 2 large subdivisions. There's hundreds of lots, hundreds of houses back there behind it. And the third one is on map 26, which is page 126. That's 043-310-22. that one is under lease right now, but it's really an eyesore. I think I'm sure you know which one we were talking about, the one that's right next to Charlotte's. It really needs to be developed, and so and I appreciate that the city has finally decided to try to work with the company, but I work with that company frequently. They're not going to do anything with it. I think, frankly, you should just make them give up their lease because we've talked to them for years about the fact that they keep saying and promising that they're going to develop that old AIH building, and have a showroom there and blah, blah, blah. But, the reality is they're not, and they've had like 20 years to do it and they haven't done it. So I really think the city should not just try to work with them on developing it, but try to get them to give up at least that eyesore lot across the street from our business, which doesn't, it's just an empty dirt pile. And it's, we spend a lot of money, thousands of dollars on landscaping on our property across the street. And it's located across the street from this dirt pile. So I really think the city should not just encourage the lot owner to develop it, because they never are going to, but rather try to get them to give up their lease or at least give up the empty lot. So, thanks. Oh, I guess I would say this. I would echo Bob's comments about the fact that I do think that the Planning Commission, the Planning and Zoning Commission, should be more involved in the planning part of what's going on at the city. And I think that's including a project like this. So, thank you.
All right, any questions? I have one. I should have asked Bob, but you're probably the boss on this anyway. If we held a work session sometime in January, is there a time that you guys won't be in town, or are you guys going to be here?
We'll be here.
Okay, great, thanks.
Thank you.
Anyone else wishing to testify? Vice Mayor Glendenning.
The Vice Mayor Glendenning on record again. I just want to say that the state charter, Title 29, calls out two prominent requirements for a first-class home rule city for a municipality: that they have a council and that they have a planning commission. The roles and responsibilities of the planning commission are delineated in Title 29, and Christine Schmidt and Bob Loy attempted to articulate that. You have a responsibility as planners to engage yourself much as you do with the comprehensive plan. We spent quite a bit of time covering these same issues on the comprehensive plan, as you recall, Chairman Twade. And again, I'm asking on behalf of the council, asking for your help in discerning the path forward on these properties. Some we don't want to sell like this lot that the building's on. Others have questions, as Christine Schmidt allowed. Others are a no-brainer. But let's roll up our sleeves. Let us go ahead and plan with this. We're not adding scope. We're just defining the scope that you already have, the charter that you have. And we would greatly appreciate your help. A work session will be fine. Again, the order of operations is you guys get last bite of the apple. All the other charters and commissions have been invited to participate. One, it's a teachable moment, it's a training program for them. But secondly, they will bring perspective and comments that maybe you hadn't thought of, maybe I hadn't thought of, no one has thought of. This is an important document. This is an important situation, and we want your energy, and we want your help. Thank you.
Question for you. If and when this passes, in whatever form it looks like, a parcel or a property that is designated to retain, if somebody came into the city and made a compelling enough argument, said, I really think this piece of property works for my business, it's good for the city of Kenai, good for its people, do they have a way to get it to the council, that let the council make a decision on that? And could it, if it says retain, could it still be sold, or does that mean it's never going to be sold? How's that going to work? I'm curious.
I would suggest that, that this is a blank sheet of paper.
What's that?
This is a blank sheet of paper, okay, as former Councilor, Vice Mayor Malloy pointed out, that there are holes in the policies and procedures. And we in our council meeting promised you that we would give you certain precepts, certain ideas, lexicons, definitions. We would give you an overview of Title 21 and 22, and there's no reason why we can't add to that inventory that it would be an appendix or an adjunct to this document. This document is just the start of it, but it says land management. But as former Vice Mayor Malloy pointed out, it's incomplete and must be embellished. For example, Mr. Greenberg helped us with the maps. Okay, well there's a former effort that was 400 pages that had quite a bit of information regarding each of these properties. What you see now has been distilled and collated into something small. But these items, as I recall, are still available, right? You can toggle to them, you can get to them.
Yeah, there's a lot of data that's associated with this. There's a lot more than this. And can I?
Sure.
Yeah. So, and maybe these are real simplified generalizations of a lot more data and a lot more information that's there. So when we see dispose, everybody kind of automatically thinks, okay, we got a land sale on our hands, you know? Doesn't it sound that way? But really, I just see it as the two categories. You're retaining a property because it's required for a public purpose. It's the police station. I don't think we're going to sell that. There's some parks. I don't think we're going to sell those. There are properties that are not required for a public purpose, and they get put into that dispose category. That doesn't necessarily mean we're going to sell them. That I would, in my interpretation, but it's been simplified to dispose, right? It's just a real simple term. It sounds like for sale. It's synonymous with for sale, right? So is it really for sale? I don't know. I mean, it sounds like a lot of properties aren't for sale. They can't be for sale. They're deed restricted. There are all these other things involved. So it might just be a modifying how we're presenting this, right? Just like you said, it's so if you had these two categories where it said, instead of dispose, it says not required for public purpose, and then you had a category for required for a public purpose, doesn't that make it a little different, you know? So at that, then it's not a land sale, I guess. Then it's just the city's opinion of, we do need to keep the police station, you know? Let's not sell that, you know? But there's some properties that we're not doing anything with. What do we want to do with those? Okay, what do you guys think? Do we want to sell it, or do we want to turn it into a park, or do we want to turn it into something else? I don't know. But I think that's where the public process kind of comes in, and people, and more review goes into it. But like I said, from the city's purpose, from the city's point of view, this disposes. They're not. The city doesn't need these properties for what they do. You know, but the ones that are required for a public purpose, that retain, the city does need those properties. So, does that help?
Yeah, here I'm sitting like I'm in the council. Thank you, Mr. Greenberg, for your testimony. But I would just point out that at the meeting we tasked administration with providing a definition, perfecting the definition and understanding of dispose. Dispose is a word of art. Okay, that is used to indicate a potential status of a property. For example, you go on the waterfront, and there are properties listed for dispose, but they're under lease until 2043. Okay, but potentially they could be disposed, and dispose could mean that they're up for lease again. If you go to on the North Beach, there are properties there that are listed for dispose, but they're occupied by set netters with long-term leases, and preferentially, we almost guarantee, there's no guarantees, that their lease will be acknowledged and renewed. It's almost like a conditional use permit. So there are all these little facets and filigrees that we're asking you to understand. Roll up your sleeves and help us define these questions. These as Mr. Greenberg points out, these are things that we need to flesh out, so we don't have an oh my God. For example, if someone wants to buy a piece of property, they have to provide a determination of worth. Okay, they pay for it. If someone else wants the same property, they have to provide a determination of worth, and so on down the line. If they don't get the bid, are they out that money? That's a common question that's been raised. Maybe that's something you can address and give some guidance to administration. This is not a one-off thing. This is not ones and zeros. This is not black and white. This is a moving, living discussion. And just as we went through with the comprehensive plan, we spent a lot of time with that. You're a veteran of that, Jeff. And there's no reason why this doesn't deserve to have the same level of snarkiness as you just exhibited.
I said that makes me sound old when you say I'm a veteran. I don't want that. Thank you. All right, we will check and see if there's anybody online that would like to testify. Doesn't appear to. So, seeing no one else in the public, I guess we'll bring it back to the commission for discussion. And I will let council member, huh? Is that better?
Yeah.
Winger, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Twig. So I just want to say thank you to Greenberg. I think that was a great suggestion because what I've been hearing in the work session, other commissions, is what is disposable, what is retained, and that is something we ask for clarification. And so maybe your change of language to not required for public purpose is a great suggestion, and that's ultimately what we're really wanting, that in-depth perspective and feedback, because there is a lot of questions surrounding that. So when we roll up our sleeves and we're digging into those are just little areas that do raise concern for everyone. And as far as we've heard comments going back and forth on the retaining disposals, I think this is going to be something, and people ask, is this set in stone? Is there going to be able to be changes? And those, I think, are questions that if you have them and we have them, it really comes down to the commissioners getting an answer and then putting it forth to the body, as well as we'll get that collective answer. And that just makes a stronger, well-rounded document when we get feedback from every individual. We hear this from multiple commissions, so it's not just questioned in one commission or the other. So there's a lot, I think, a benefit of doing a joint work session, because you guys do have a level of expertise that isn't seen on maybe some other commissions. They don't have that in-depth perspective. I've heard, different questions coming out of Parks and Recs. They really have a good in-depth on their surrounding parks area. Feedback, maybe they understand, maybe they see a zoning change on some of the lands. So I think there's a lot of benefit in getting a good, thorough feedback. It's going to make this a very solid document going forward. So if you have that question, maybe another commission has that question, and you guys being kind of the ones that a lot of commissioners look up to, they're going to get that answer from their fellow peers that they work with, and not so much the body. So I just want to say I thought that was a great a suggestion, and I wrote that down to bring. And I do, I take notes, so I like to hear those suggestions, and it is something that we'll bring forth. So thank you.
All right. So I guess we have before us a motion, and we're ready to do with it whatever we want to do. Yeah, Mr. Foster, go ahead. Actually, was going to get you in there earlier. I forgot, so go ahead.
No worries. Thank you, Chair Twade. I did want to note, staff will be providing a laydown with additional information starting tomorrow night for the Airport Commission on topics such as zoning, Title 21, 22, and those definitions of disposable and retain. And we'll be including those for all the commissions, so for both Harbor and Parks and Rec and Beautification, and then I can include that on the 22nd as well. I'd say the only thing is for planning and zoning, it's going to be information you use really because you're the most familiar with zoning and Title 21 and 22. You see that all the time. For these other commissions, not so much. So we did want to provide that that information to give them a better understanding of these processes. And yeah, I would just to end on to sort of reiterate what Commissioner Greenberg was saying is that really I think the focus of this current document was on the inventory of the mapping and then of the recommendation. But it really is, it's just recommendation. We have all these other processes that are required to move forward with either Title 21 at the airport or 22. That requires all that additional review of looking at our airport plan, looking at our comprehensive plan, these plans that already exist that should be guiding development in the community. And then, of course, these all require council's approval as well as to show how, even if it says dispose, it still needs to show how it's there are no restrictions, as well as to ensure that there isn't a public use for that property. So I just want to kind of point out that in the format it's in right now, it's really about inventory and recommendation. I don't think the idea was to use that as a standalone document that everything can be done in just this one package, if you will, that we're very dependent on all of our other processes and code, whether it's zoning, Title 21, Title 22, our comprehensive plan, our airport plan, and so on. Like, those are all very much a part of being utilized with this plan. But I'd just like to say I really appreciate the comments. We're continuing to meet with all the other commissions, and hopefully we start to compile more comments. And I do think it can be really helpful. I think staff has acknowledged that there might be changes that come later to update code. Perhaps we update Title 21, Title 22 based on the land management plan and based on the discussions we have. From my perspective, I almost sort of expect to have those types of tweaks and changes, and I think it's relevant to think about policy as well. If we're not seeing is there additional guidance needed from something like the comprehensive plan or from the airport plan or trails, harbor commission, or so on. I think it's worthwhile having that discussion, and I'll end it there.
Commissioner Dothett.
So I guess I just like to bring up that we're talking about what we have for policy and procedures and how would it work to retain or dispose of something. And I have personally gone through the policies and procedures that were in place as of current right now when I was looking at a lot a year ago with the previous planning director. And basically what it went down to when I was a business owner looking to purchase a lot, I had a meeting with the city manager and the planning director at the time. We sat down. I had picked out, before we had the mapping, this was all before the mapping, that would have made it much more streamlined for me to be able to pick these out, because I just went on the old mapping system and literally had to click and see who owned what until I found a half dozen city lots that were like, yeah, this is what I need to do. These are the ones I want to talk about. And I printed them off in hard copy, brought them in, and then we discussed about it. And I was like, well, here's 6 lots that I've picked out. This is my business idea that I want to do. And then they would recommend, okay, well, these 3 lots, we don't really think that would fit there with the city plan that we have and our and what we think would be best fitted. And then they would narrow it down to 2 or 3 other lots. And then we talked, well, how am I going to get pricing? Well, then they came up with an idea. This is the ballpark idea on the pricing. And then they said, well, you write up an application to purchase it, and here's the different ideas and how you can do that. And then you submit it, and we see if you can, choose to purchase it. So it wasn't overly complicated, and I think this here would simplify things greatly. Having this much information on what the city owns, I could have gone on the city website or gotten this plan and been like, oh, these are the ones that are available. When I clicked on them, it would have told me whether the city was thinking about possibly wanting to sell them or not. There were a few lots that I went to that the city was like, no, we're not going to sell those. We need those. We're going to retain those, so we can't. That's not for sale for certain purposes. And that was even before this document. So I think there are policies and procedures on how they go about selling land now, and maybe that's something that definitely needs to be brought up to other members to kind of clarify how that works. If it's not been brought up yet. But there are ways to go about it, and it is in writing right now, and that'd be a good thing maybe for staff to go over. Like right now, just even if it was a mock thing, and somebody says, hey, I want to purchase this lot, and go through how that would work. Because I think that's a very confused, it's this mythical creature of what this works and how it works. But it's not overly complicated, and it is there, and there's a lot of stuff that talks about it. And I think that might be a good thing for staff to bring up is, even if they just do write up here's an application that somebody would have to do. Here's a mock application they would do. This is the steps and the various steps that they would have to go through to be able to purchase a land. Also, as far as the retaining question, from what I understood, it would have to go to a council for approval. Even if it said retain, council could override that. From what I was understood when I was asked about it, when I asked staff, I believe it said they could vote, but it would have to go for a council vote, from what I understood. And I might be completely wrong, but even if it said retain, like you said, Chair Twait, that I think that if it were to be ultimately approved through council, then they could override a retention in this. But I'm not unless this document's different, or this might be referring to a different retention or not. But that would be another good question for staff, I think, to clarify something like that. But as far as having the procedures in place, I think there are procedures there, just maybe people aren't familiar with them.
Anyone else? Commissioner Greenberg.
Yeah, just a couple of things. Just like Commissioner Douthit had mentioned, this is really streamlined things to be able to get information to people really quickly, but maybe it's gotten so streamlined that it's leading people to believe that this has gotten us to the place where it's a land sale, but it hasn't gotten to that level yet, right? So maybe it's been over streamlined, I guess, or it's been taking as over streamlined, but maybe it should be good to clarify that it isn't a land sale. That this is just a recommendation, going back to what I said before, that these are lands that are not required for public purpose. And then from what I'm also hearing is that we don't even have a policy or process for land sale, really, to get these properties out there. But I imagine a land sale will come in the future. So, but that would be a select set of these lands that reaches that criteria, has enough support, and folks would really support that. The borough had a process a few years ago of choosing lands for municipal entitlement, and in that they took a lot of input, and they made their decisions based on that input, and they won some awards on that. So it might be worth looking at that process to come to the conclusion of these lands are for how do we refine our dispose? How do we redefine that? How do we get more detail on those disposed lands and what to do with those? So it might be worth looking at what the borough did with their municipal lands. So is this the right time for this question? How many respondents have we had through that online form? Is that what all of them that are here? Is that just those couple of, because that's not a lot.
Through to Chair Commissioner Greenberg, it isn't. I actually did talk to a member of the community yesterday who was looking to add comments there. So, yeah, only a handful of comments. We had a handful of comments from the work session, in October. I just say we're getting more comments through these processes, through the commission meetings, and the idea is to keep having these conversations and compiling comments and working with them. So.
And the city of Seward had a municipal lands plan, and I helped them with that. Again, do mapping and such things. But theirs was grouped a little bit differently, and it wasn't necessarily these categories. It was more grouped on land uses. So you would have park section. So these are parks. So there really wasn't a whole lot of questions on these are parks. We're not going to sell these or buy these. These are public facilities. These are,
Land management use?
Yeah. So that was more of the theme of that particular document, which is a little bit different than this theme. But again, I think this is a great start, and I think it's getting some great feedback. I think it just maybe just right at this point, just some refinement of the semantics and definitions would help people to understand it a little bit better.
Gary, this might be a question for you. How easy would it be to search these by wetlands or things of that nature so that we could have those numbers and say, okay, out of these, however many are set for retain and dispose, how many of them are wetlands? I assume only the disposal ones probably aren't. Yeah, I mean, would that be easy to do, or?
That might be a conflict of interest for me to answer. Yeah, I can do it. Yeah. Yeah, it's not hard to do, and that's what we put into the map. I mean, I could even go, we put layers into that map that show where the wetlands are, they show where the steep slopes are, they show all those. To run those type of analysis requires technical, button pushing, but it's not hard to do. It's not that it's easy to do, it's not hard to do. It can be done.
Mr. Foster?
Chair Tway, yes, it's there. We do have that data. It's just, it's just we're running the query for what information you're looking for. So we do have, all of our parcels, topography, wetlands, flood zones,
Right.
Information like that. And that was something that when we were at the last kind of round of commission meetings, going through the sort of the beta app that actually primarily the architect is Gary, working with our GIS and the access database of the inventory, really trying to demonstrate how that is like really it's an additional tool. It takes really what's here in the management plan, and there's even technically more than this because we actually include all of the attached, deed restriction documents, like that level of detail, along with all this mapping, data. So it could be that's a tool where not just internally could be utilized, but we're hoping that it could be provided for online, external use as well for those types of queries. So.
Gary?
Yeah, you could, if you look back at the comprehensive plan, I made those maps as well, and there's one map called I forgot, it's like suitability analysis or something like that. And what I did was I basically erased all the wetlands, and then a lot of that land goes away. So as soon as and there's other criteria that you can use, like there's, they call them like environmental constraints map or something like. So you say the criteria that you want. This is what you can't build on. You can't build on this type of slopes. You can't build on this wetlands. You can't build on it because it's deed restricted or whatever, and you come up with that criteria, you plug it all in, and then you erase a whole bunch of stuff,
Filters.
Yeah, you filter it. It's called an overlay in an analysis. So that stuff that can definitely be done, and like I said, if you look back at the comprehensive plans, some of those maps will show those things, and then how far are things from the water and sewer, and that's in there too. So you could turn the water on and sewer on and say if this is far enough from the water and sewer that we don't have to hook up, or we do have to hook up, or we do have to extend the water. It's going to cost this much more. So all these things, it's there to be queried, to be filtered, like you said.
How about other utilities, gas, electric, those things? Do we have that information on those two or not?
Electric, HEA will share their electric. They don't share all their electric information, but NSTAR won't share any of their information.
Okay.
I don't want anybody to blow anything up or something.
It's probably not terrible. Vice Chair Fikes?
Yeah, speaking from the borough experience for the last couple land sales that they've put together and they've built upon, it's just what we're doing right now. It's just a compilation of town hall meetings and dialogue back and forth with the community and other planning and zoning commissions out there. So you have folks that are interested in their areas that have a planning commission to step forward and share some of their concerns, and that's kind of what's gone into the land sale. And an example of that was the California Beach area. They had a dormant planning commission or advisory commission, I should say, and when we had the land sale come around, then all of a sudden everybody stepped up and said, well, you're having a parcel of property that's coming up and available that's got some contamination on it, and nobody on the panel at the time had any data on that. So it was something that had occurred quite a while back. So it was hugely helpful to hear that kind of testimony. So I think the path that we're taking, I think, is the route that's most successful. Like I say, this last borough sale that they had was one of the biggest ones that they've had in their history. So if that's something you guys want to tap into, Scott Huff would be somebody you could have a conversation with. But a lot of the things that we looked at were just that. They were land management uses. You know, when you're talking about conservation, when you're talking about recreational, suburban, you know, those are the things that went into that. When you had a assisted living facility, how big of an assisted living facility? What kind of infrastructure is going to support that? What kind of distance between emergency services and whatnot are those concerns? What kind of safety stuff? Is there going to be a hydrant nearby? Is that going to be a requirement for code? And, you know, so there was quite a bit of in-depth discussion, I thought, back and forth. So, I mean, it led to a decent selection, and obviously it yielded a pretty good profit for them. So I would say it was successful.
So maybe Mr. Foster, maybe Mr. Malloy, maybe Vice Mayor Glendenning, any of you guys might be able to answer this question. I've never taken the understanding that when it says dispose that it's going to end up advertised across the country for sale and we're going to get rid of it one way or the other. It's still just going to sit there until somebody shows interest. Now, I could be wrong, and maybe I am wrong, but I've never seen that as being that's the ultimate goal. Vice Mayor Glendenning.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman Twait. Again, as I said in my testimony, we tasked administration with a clear definition of the word dispose. It's a word of art and leads to confusion, such as the discussion we're having now. And your points are well taken. I would suggest that I will say now, Councilor Malloy is well versed in this because that's what he deals in. He deals in land use, and perhaps might be more elegantly able to describe the answer to your question. Thank you.
If you so would.
I just think it's just not clear in the plan. You know, it needs to be clarified. Because you know, the definition says will be available for lease or sale. And so will be available for lease or sale, you know, and so there isn't really any clarification about how you get to there or whether it's like Commissioner Greenberg says, you know, that you know, it really means it doesn't mean that, you know, it means something else. So it just needs that needs to be clarified, and I'm happy to hear that the council has you know, directed that clarification be made.
So again, for any one of you four, tomorrow or yesterday, if the city doesn't, are they actively trying to sell land, or is it somebody coming in inquiring about it and that's how it happens? I'm just curious. So I'm wondering if we're going to get in the business of trying to sell land, or if it's still going to be consumer driven by somebody walking in the door. And again, maybe that's the same answer. We don't know yet. But how is it done now?
It is done as actually as Commissioner Dothit described. You walk in and you scramble through what's there and you come up with your best decision. And we're trying to improve on that. We're trying to have more than an ad hoc situation. And I think and would strongly suggest that the planning department is working to refine that approach. But Mr. Foster perhaps could more describe, you know, if I came in and wanted to buy a piece of land, it can be done. It can be done. But the process is as Citizen Schmidt would say.
Citizen Malloy.
Citizen Schmidt would say it's ad hoc and it's confusing and it's not transparent, and this is what we're trying to get away from, And I'm not going to put words in Mr. Foster's mouth, but I think he would prefer to have a system with policies and procedures and a means of explaining to a prospective customer exactly what happens. If you have another Walmart coming in, they're going to come in with their attorneys and questions, and they will have the full attention and focus of not only of administration but of Planning and Zoning Commission. But it's when someone comes in and they want to set up a business, how do you adequately describe to them the requirements and what's available, and how do they respond to the answers that they posed?
You're getting good at this Vice Mayor stuff. So the answer to the question is consumer driven, basically, at this point. The city's not actively advertising land for sale, correct?
That's what I said.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I would amend that if I could, just a little bit. I mean, they do the airport manager does promote potential lots, like I said, over on the other side of Floatplain Basin, because that's part of the airport plan. So they go to conventions and they have a booth and they actually have information and they try to get people to be interested in leasing that property. But of course, those aren't for sale. So, and so they have a way of that they're already decided how they go about doing it and what property they're going to do that for.
Okay, great.
So, but other than that, it's all ad hoc.
Okay. Mr. Foster.
Well, Chair Twit, yeah, that's exactly what I was gonna bring up, is that there is like an annual brochure about the airport, lease-only properties, their availability, and so those are a little bit more actively, kind of marketed, if you will, as opposed to really kind of non-airport reserve. So I'd say in the experience and the time that I've been here, a lot of it is that we just get asked the question, about, city property. I will say, if you might recall, in one of our earlier meetings on this topic, when we had the GIS mapper up, I took everyone through a case of when the Triumvirate Theater came through, and that was the question, right? Their theater, it was last February, it burned down in Nikiski, and so they were really just coming from like a square one of like, hey, we'd really like to rebuild and have a new theater, and so what I was able to do, actually without the help with the app, it would actually be quicker now, was to utilize both the database. It's in Access, but you can still query that. What we actually had to do at the time was take the Access database and run a query of what they were looking for in particular. So whether it was like lot size, it had to have paved roads, it had to have utilities, sewer, water, and so on. They were looking for some place centrally located, some place that was buildable, without steep slopes, without wetlands and floodplains and so on. And so that's most of the time how the process has come to me in roughly the last year. So it's been a little bit more reactive, but I think the idea is certainly with the database and the GIS being on that ArcGIS online app, it's much quicker and easier to do those types of queries. And again, that notion of at least the hopes is that we'd be able to take that and have that be a public fronting tool. And so it might be that somebody's actually done some searches themselves before they even come about next steps in the process. And so when that happens, when we get that query of somebody's just looking for something like the theater or like KPHI came last summer as well, we help with that query and the gathering the information, as well as the certainly deed restrictions that can come up is really important information to have, and then having meetings to talk through. Here's what the process is. Here's what here's an application for let's say purchase with the option to lease, or I'm sorry, lease with the option to purchase, and so on, and going through all of the processes that that would entail in talking about our development incentives, that are available, and here's what the planning process looks like. Here's what the building process looks like, and start having those conversations about really what becomes a much bigger project discussion. And I'll often, again, sometimes it's dependent on the person that has the inquiry. I'll ask about bringing in other departments, so whether that's building department, fire department, and so on, to start having a conversation, about what could end up being a potential real world project, and all those steps that would have to go through.
Vice Chair Fikes.
Are there any unforeseen needs as far as public works? I know we've relocated our water wells more than once. Is that any consideration in any of the properties?
Mr. Foster.
Through the chair, Vice Chair Fikes, my understanding is that's been in consideration for the recommendations in the draft plan. And I believe that's also why there's a number of properties that have that mixed designation, where there's maybe a larger municipal property that has some type of public use that is identified, and therefore there'd have to be some subdivision and something a part of a larger project. Now, your question specifically to wells, I'm not sure. I'd have to follow up with the Public Works Director on that. I'm not sure.
But for sure, the Public Works Director has weighed in on this and has been part of this discussion over the course of time, right? So we assume, again, without, putting him on the spot, but he's obviously looked at that as a need and how to handle it going forward.
Yeah, Chair Twit, yes, there's been that level of review, but I think what is really helpful at this stage is to have, the commissions review it from their, subject matter expertise as well. And so while, just for example, like the airport has been, reviewed to have the result of the recommendations here, and so tomorrow night, we'll continue this conversation, I hopefully focusing on the airport commission, and we might have some additional findings, that they, as subject matter experts, at the airport, might have new recommendations or comments or information that we should know now and not later down the road. So.
Anyone else? So my thoughts would be, and just throwing this out for discussion, is that I think a work session would be beneficial, whether it's a joint work session with all the other commissions, which might get clunky. I don't know that we want to do that necessarily. But I would prefer to hear one, have one, and get any of the other feedback we have. And I think the other thing we need to do, and I'll task everybody here, we're ambassadors for the city of Kenai. So when you're in the grocery store, you're in anywhere, take the time and mention it to them that this is up, and either get them to come and make a comment on the record publicly or go online and do it or something. But I think make that one last effort to really try to get the public to weigh in, because it is best when the public weighs in. But I do know you can't hold them at gunpoint to do it, and lots of times they can come up with a million other things to do that are more important until all of a sudden it affects them negatively.
I think that first week of
go.
First, like, for a work session in January, probably after the holidays, before our next meeting.
Yeah, I mean, we have a meeting on the 12th.
Like 3rd or 4th or the 10th or 11th, maybe. I don't know if any.
I'm out of town the 3rd and 4th.
It would just be good to have, I think, before our next meeting, if we could.
and I don't know, Mr. Foster might have a better idea. Does administration have a day that works better for it? I mean, if it's not one of these colored days on our calendar, it's probably okay, huh? Maybe, so here's what I think we can do. We're gonna have a meeting in 2 weeks. We can just postpone this thing, let administration work that out, see when they think a work session in January works. I will be gone at the very end of the month. And then I might miss that first meeting in February too. So, I'll be here for our 26th meeting, I think, and I leave right after that. So,
That 11th, before our next meeting, will you be gone on that January 12th meeting?
I'll be here for that for sure. Yeah, I'm not leaving, I think, till the 27th or 28th, so.
So, what about, like, I'm just throwing dates out there, the 10th, that Monday? There's nothing going on that day?
I mean, I guess if we have a day that we think works best, and then we can let Mr. Foster work with the rest of the administration, because I really think what we want to do is try to get, if not just Mr. Foster, I would prefer maybe even have Mr. Ostrander here again or somebody, and then we can really drill down and get some, and in the meantime, maybe get some answers to some of the questions we had tonight so that we have a better idea going forward.
Mr.
Mr.
Trey,
Foster.
would it be helpful, before the meeting on December 22nd, we could look at dates and potential arrangements for a work session in January? And so I have a follow-up question. Is the preference, so we do have meeting dates on January 12th and the 26th. Just FYI, I've actually had inquiries about applications for January 12th. Is the preference to do a standalone, work session separate from a regular meeting?
Or just come in like an hour early, is that what you're thinking? Maybe come and start at 6 for a work session, maybe?
We do that often, but I guess it begs the question, is that enough time to do?
Yeah, I don't think it is.
Yeah.
I mean, and then it gets hurried because the last 10 minutes you're just wrapping up and trying to do it. So a separate day
Okay.
would be best, or it would be best to do it after, I think, and run it till, the wee hours. But if we've already got stuff on there, we don't really know how late that gets. I would just have a separate night probably would be best.
Okay. Would it help to take a look, have a couple of dates at the next meeting for
Yeah.
consideration? Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, if we can do that by the next meeting, just have a couple dates out there, preferably before the January 12th meeting, so we can have something to talk about on that. And then, do you want to make a motion to postpone any further comment on this on PZ 2021-39 until the January 12th meeting? Or do we want to keep it on the agenda for the 26th?
Let's keep it on for the next meeting, I think, and then if something comes up, we have it there to talk about, I think. We can always open it and close it again immediately, but yeah, go ahead and.
So we're to the 26th, is that where we're looking?
22nd.
22nd?
Yeah.
26th, I'm not going to be, no. So the 22nd meeting is what we're going to postpone it, December, that we're looking at?
Okay.
Okay,
Yep.
I'll make a motion to postpone PZ 2021-39, recommendation to the council, Siddiqui and I, for approval of the land management plan until the December 22nd meeting. Is that
A second.
Second. Do we just take a vote, or is there discussion on that? Discussion? No? We're not gonna. We're gonna go to the vote.
Chair Tweet,
Yes.
Commissioner Woodard,
Yes.
Commissioner Greenberg,
Yes.
Commissioner Douthat,
yes?
Vice Chair Fikes.
Yes.
Motion passes.
All right. We have no pending items under item I, so J is reports. J1, City Council. Councilperson Winger.
Thank you, Chair. So council met last Wednesday. We had quite a long meeting with a lot of public comment. We took public comment while we waited for our scheduled public speaker, which was the presentation for our annual comprehensive final report audits. Our audit came out good on the penny. No errors or any mishaps were found in that audit. as far as public hearings went, our ordinance number 3254 passed. That was amending the Kenai Municipal Code to allow telephonic participation at planning and zoning commission meetings. I think the overall feel from the body is it is important to make sure that you guys have every means to make the meetings as well as getting public comment. The next ordinance that passed was 3255, which is accepting and appropriating grants from the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, passed through the State of Alaska Department Military and Veterans Affairs for the purchase of public safety radios for police, fire, and the communication departments. This has been kind of a multiple step in upgrading all of their radio systems. I believe this should leave just a hair little bit more in grants needed to have a full replacement of all of our radios. So we should see maybe one more coming down for public safety radios. The next resolution that passed was the authorizing a budget transfer in the CARES Act Recovery Fund for the first responder and incident management team payroll. We had $63,000, a little over $63,000 in COVID funds that were left. We had a choice of throwing it into a shop local program, matching it with some general fund dollars. Council chose to kind of hold on to the money and have a better game plan, maybe a better program in the future. So we put that money over to cover those expenses. So $63,000 is now allocated currently in our general fund. The next resolution that passed was approving the execution of a lease for the airport funds land used in the standard lease between the City of Kenai and the Integrated Account Management for the Cook Inlet Industrial Air Park subdivision. That too passed. And then the next resolution that passed was 2021-70, which is opposing government mandates requiring vaccines and face coverings related to COVID-19. That passed by unanimous decision. And for clarification on that, we are not saying not to do it, not to get vaccinated, not to wear a mask. We're just simply saying that the city isn't going to take a government approach through mandates on that. Businesses are able to do whatever they'd like to do in their own private businesses. Kenaitze being their own government entity, I've received a lot of calls on that. They too can still put forth. Federal, at the same time we did this, they were requiring the federal Title I programs, which are pre-K programs, they have to wear masks. So it wouldn't qualify to be used for any of those entities. We heard a lot of public comment on the land management plan. Myself and Vice Mayor Glendenning did go to administration and ask for more information on the Titles 21, 22, 29, zonings, and a land table use were some of the items that we were asked to be provided. We had various questions and concerns from people after meetings that may not get to comment simply because they didn't know where to start. So our suggestion was pulling back and really asking for more input from our commissioners, and the public. As we kind of got to tonight, getting these public comments, they truly are important. I know Chair Twait had said, you know, when you're in the grocery stores, talk to somebody, ask somebody. And maybe the approach of it would be, hey, what do you think of this land management plan? They're going to say, oh, I don't really care. But you can say, hey, do you know there's this land in your neighborhood that's up for disposable or retain? We should have a knowledge and be able to pull something out. I would be able to talk to somebody in Inlet Woods about maybe a map or land in that area. So start kind of digging into it more with maybe a more specific approach than just what do you think of this 216-page document. I think maybe reaching out to people on specific issues will get a better result, simply because there's a lot of land that is disposable, retainable, or leased. And if we make a decision, we may see pitchforks and torches at future meetings, because maybe they're just not aware what the plan is. And once they find out that, oh, this is being developed, that's when we'll see some angry neighborhoods. So if you notice any maps in there, just get in-depth conversations. I know there's some for me and Mr. Springer that fall in our neighborhood that are concerns, and that specific map in those neighborhoods are things that we are able to address with individuals and get comments and input from. Other than that, I appreciate the discussion tonight. I look forward to doing the work session into the new year with everybody. I really believe this is going to be a solid document for the city if we really get that public input and in-depth understanding. It's all about the buy-in from our commissioners. You guys are kind of the glue that holds it together. So feedback is critical and important. Council will be meeting next Wednesday here in the chambers at 6 o'clock. We have a few items that will be discussed that we'd like to get public comment. One of them is Ordinance 3256, which is increasing the estimated revenues and appropriations. We're accepting a grant for the sand storage facility, construction phase 2. If you're familiar, we've been working quite a bit on our sand storage, shifters, reusing the sands. So there's been a lot of work when it comes to the airport sand storage facility in the last year. We'll also be looking at Ordinance 3257, which is accepting and appropriating a collection equity award for the Network of National Library of Medicine for the purchase of health and wellness titles for the Kenai Community Library. There's Ordinance 3258, accepting and appropriating the funding from the State of Alaska Department of Health and Division of Public Health for the Health in Equitable Communities Program and authorizing the city manager to execute an agreement. So we were able to get $85,000. We had two projects brought forth to the body to look at applying that money. One was updating playground equipment at the ball strips, and the other one was putting a bridge walkway that would connect the Forest Park over behind the ball fields, going towards the beach right behind the Lee Shore Center and that area. And that was the project that the body went through with. So ultimately the $85,000 would apply to that project. We'd also be looking at ordinance number 3259, increasing the estimated revenues and appropriations in the general municipal roadway for our capital project funds for a purchase order for the bluff erosion repair. And then another ordinance is number 3260, which is amending the Kenai Municipal Code definitions to maintain the current regulations of off-road vehicles after January 1st. As many of you know, the state will be allowing ATVs, snow machines, stuff on the roadways. The city still sees the liability and concern in that. So this was brought forth as kind of the housekeeping part of what we've always had in code and regulation, and just putting it forth that even with the state making the changes, we will still have this within regulation. And that is all I have, and just thank you everyone for your comments and serving.
Any questions? Vice Chair Fikes?
So with the $63,000 that was appropriated from the CARES Act going into the general fund, what would be an example of cost incurred by the city? If it just goes in the general fund, is it going to go towards the burden of those costs that the city has taken on, or is it just going to go into the fund?
Thank you, Ms. Fikes. So being that we put it towards our payroll for our first responders, that is already covered in our general fund. It's already in the budget. So ultimately, it is an acceptable use for covering with COVID funds. But payrolls were already there. They're already covered. We had no shortfalls in that budget. So it's truly just now in excess of $63,000 sitting unallocated in the general fund. We do have ordinances that will be introduced soon to use those funds.
Any other questions? Commissioner Dothett.
On the ATV thing that's coming up, I would really think we should dive over our existing ATV regulations. I think that'd be a good time to look into that and just make sure there's nothing that needs to be updated or possibly tweaked a little bit. I think that may be a good time to look into some of those things. I know there's some of that stuff is pretty antiquated in there. I know there's a lot of people that are, they get pulled over and they feel like they're getting harassed when they're driving from one trail to the next in the back roads. And I think we could possibly tweak that a little bit during that time frame. And I think it might be something to look into, dive into those regulations a little bit before we just move on to say we're going to keep it the same. Might be a good time to look into those and see if there's anything that might be brought up to, we could maybe open up a little bit and not necessarily exactly what the state is. I agree with the cities that we don't need to be having people driving down Kenai Spur Highway on an ATV, but there's a lot of little back roads and stuff. They might be able to adjust their regulations to help a little bit with that. But that was it.
Thank you, Commissioner Dothett. I agree. I think when we see these housekeepings, it does give us a chance to kind of dig in. I have seen people get pulled over that just cross from one trail to the next. I also live in an area right by the cemetery where we see all the flow of dip netting traffic. So one of the problems we see are side-by-sides and four-wheelers that leave the ball field, come ripping and roaring up and down the grass strip, crossing up onto the roads, cutting cars off. None of them have helmets on. And so we see this as a continual issue in our neighborhood of people using the roadways, those back roadways, to cut across, that's like a 5 blocks worth of cutting back roads across on their ATVs. Trail to trail is understandable. Using it as the cut through of back roads to the beach gets to be a little hairy. So I think those are all different points to bring up, and I would encourage you to come and testify, maybe look into it, see if there's any concern in language and make those suggestions. You guys have a powerful voice when you come and do give input in front of the council, and I would encourage that.
Anyone else? Regarding the library grant, I know there was a little discussion regarding some of the terminology. Has that been looked into further as far as making sure there's no conditions attached down the line on that before that's going to be accepted?
Thank you, Chair Toy. I know on my own personal, I've worked with another council member, and I know we've spent probably 20 hours digging into it. We were able to pull the actual grant to read the grant language of what was said, the application. I think the hang-up really does come to the wording. I believe the other council member was going to go and see if there was any way to maybe change the wording or mimic the wording. They weren't quite sure if we could do that because that was the name of the grant. But I think it's not about the books, it's about the wording. So we're basically saying that we have underserved populations of our community, and I don't think that fits our mission statement with our library. We've always served every user group of our community very well. So to take a grant in to say, yeah, we've underserved groups was, I think, a lot of the concern. I know like I said, we've gone back and forth, batting this back and forth individually. I feel comfortable with where I'm at on my vote and my decision. I can understand the concern in that because we ultimately do say that we are underserving part of our population. And I don't, so we wanted it to maybe change it where it said accepting an appropriate collection, updating equity award for the network. And that way it just shows that we're updating material that may be a little outdated, but not that we've underserved those groups. So those were some of the thought processes going back and forth. And it'll be one that we definitely are going to dive into a lot more at this upcoming meeting. And I suggest input.
Thank you. Commissioner Woodard.
On that same subject, they ended up getting, something like $20,000 donated to the library due to this discrepancy in the wording. Why do you even need that fund now, or that grant, if they've been given, 5 times as much money by somebody else to buy something, or, books on the same, they can pick their own books.
Thank you, Ms. Woodard. Agree. Those are some of the comments that have gone back and forth. Fortunately, the council has to accept that money, so we have yet to see that money be introduced to be accepted, so we'd have to accept it and appropriate it, and that part of it has not been done. As far as there was talk about, well, maybe we shouldn't accept this and just allocate the extra $1,500 come budget time. So I know there's been a lot of different comments and approaches on this. It'll be really interesting to see how it plays out at this upcoming meeting.
Vice Chair Fikes?
On the cost to appropriate funds towards a new trail at the end of the North Forest, is that what you said? South Beach? South Forest? Yeah, South Forest, thanks, I got it wrong. So is that part of the bluff erosion program, or is that a completely separate deal?
No, it's not. It's not part of that at all. I think it's been kind of a dream of Parks and Recs to include the trail systems back behind the baseball fields there, the youth baseball fields that would connect over a bridge over the goalie there that would connect over to the park. So it's just kind of playing into the vision that Parks and Recs has, and I know the baseball entity has done a lot of work on their trails back there. They've added some signs in, and I think it's kind of that partnership and what the youth baseball has done, the vision of Parks and Recs, and it's just an additional piece to that.
So we have a full $80,000 to put towards that, is that what you said?
85,000. So we got about 40-something thousand of it, and then the borough matched it, and then there could be a second and a third part. So this could be the first project we allocate the grant money for, and then we could receive in the future additional grant money that could then go to the playground equipment. They had about 5 areas that we had to look at to decide if this fit the need. And one of the areas where we've decided that the playground equipment was outdoor activities, promote healthier lifestyles. So we were able to fit into that spectrum as far as accepting the grant.
So have they thought about doing any kind of updating of restrooms in that area? Outdoor restrooms?
I do know that that's part of another grant that we had gotten for the South Beach. There was about $900,000 in that grant. I served on Parks and Rec during this time. We allocated some to the vault, additional vault restrooms on the beach, and as well as vault restrooms up there with baseball because of the amount of porta potties and the expense of renting those, and the amount of testimony we heard of. There's one resident, if you've been down there, there's one resident. They've got a beautiful little house with birch burlow logs kind of across from Lee Shore and next to the, and they see people using the bathroom non-stop. Heard this is a lot of testimony. So there was definitely quite a bit of testimony saying that they needed adequate bathrooms. So it is something that was approved. They just didn't break ground on that because infrastructure, there's a shortage on everything. And I'll just add a little more. I do know that they would like to eventually look at their baseball dugouts. If you've been to the baseball fields, a lot of those wood dugouts are collapsing. There's one that shouldn't even be used because it's kind of collapsing in.
Well, that's what I'm wondering. $80,000 seems like a lot for a trail, but there could have been other added accessory buildings or structures that could have benefited.
And there's a lot of views of seeing that too. So there's a lot of things that Parks and Recs have brought through, and they actually have a really active group that comes in for different needs. The disc golf has been one that we've heard from. They would like the disc golf thing moved from by Safeway. They had not so nice names for what they called it because of the use is kind of dangerous, and they don't use it as far as the disc golf community. So they were wanting maybe that to be relocated somewhere else. So maybe the money could be used to relocating that into another area that will get more use out of it. Maybe those can be removed from that area and put over by the Oilers field where that disc golf course is just booming in use. So I think there's a lot of different projects that have been brought forth from the community as far as their needs.
All right, thank you very much. J2 Borough Planning, Vice Chair Fikes.
Alrighty then, we went ahead and met on Monday, November 29th, and, let's see. We had a building setback encroachment permit, let's see, in the Sterling area, Scout Loop area. And it was pretty straightforward. That one was approved. And then we had an ordinance, as Jim Glendenning had mentioned, regarding the Planning Commission membership and appointment. And just along that same line, a lot of testimony wasn't necessarily directed or coming from Kenai. They just seemed to be vocal in their position on it. But there was also from many of the other folks there, from the Homer area, from the Soldotna area, from the Ridgeway. Everybody seemed to echo, and it was a unanimous vote, that this was a way to move forward, and everybody was kind of baffled by why we were at the 9-member panel, actually 11-member panel. We were 9, but we were scheduled for 11, but we had resignations, so we were serving with 9, but we were dwindling it down and getting into situations where we really couldn't have a quorum possibly, and so it was getting kind of scary, and it was brought back up. The whole reason that we had shifted that way was because of the wording of Title 29 saying that, you know, as the borough grows, then you're going to need more seats kind of thing, and so they weren't sure what that language meant. So in a nutshell, it was good that there was some topic and there was some discussion, because it brought forth a lot of clarity and understanding through all the communities, from Hope to Homer and beyond. And so Seldovia will get a voice in it. Seward will have a seat. Like Jim had mentioned, the home rule folks will have a guaranteed seat. We won't be looking at the shell game of sitting out, jumping back in kind of thing. So, and it was greatly important. You know, there's folks that served in the Anchor Point area that have somebody on the commission. There's folks that are just close by in Nilchik, and they're like, well, we had a gravel pit extraction in that area, you know, and so as the topic and the discussion came forward, you know, I may have passed by it here and there, but to hear from those people on the panel that actually are impacted every time one of these stupid trucks goes by or backs up, you know, it was good feedback instead of just that 1 or 2 experience of going out on the beach or something, you know. So it was a great discussion. I'm glad it was brought forward and discussed. And that was kind of all that we had on the docket. We are still actively doing Zoom meetings as needed, but myself as well as 3 other folks are still meeting in chambers, so we're still taking advantage of that. Come racing in at the last minute, but you know, I'm there. I'm participating, so that's all I have for right now, unless anybody has any questions.
Any questions? All right, thank you. J3 Administration, Mr. Foster.
Thank you, Chair Tway. Just a few items of note. We do have 2 conditional use permit applications for the next meeting on December 22nd. In addition, I'll provide some dates for consideration of a work session in January, as well as that additional information sheet on the land management plan. We did have to send out the admin 3 position posting for a third time, so we're working on trying to fill that position. I guess it's only been about 2 months since Willie left. It feels like 2 years. It's just like, it's really, it's really, really tough having an important position still be open, but we'll continue plugging away on that. And I did want to note a couple of informational items. I did include the 2022 commission meeting calendar for reference in the upcoming new year. And last, the letter regarding a conditional use permit code violation. It's on page 68. This is a letter stating that they've remedied the code violation, which was that they needed 15, per their landscape plan, 15 trees planted 15 feet apart. At the time of the letter on September 22nd, there was actually only 3 trees there. The additional trees have all been planted. There is a slight difference between what is on the landscape site plan, and that's that it did note the species of trees. It said green spruce trees. I stated that I thought it was acceptable, to have them be deciduous trees planted there in lieu of what the landscape site plan stated. And I believe that filled the intent of what those trees are supposed to do for the landscape plan, and thought it'd be a little heavy-handed to ask them to update their landscape site plan based on the species of trees. And so this was, again, this is based on the code update, providing information on conditional use permit code violations, and this is that letter stating that I found them to now have remedied that and be in compliance with their landscape site plan, which is always something that's really nice to see come to fruition and get resolved. That is the end of my report.
Any questions? Vice Chair Fikes?
Where are we at with abandoned buildings? I know we were tackling code and talking about abandoned vehicles and whatnot, moving forward into the new year. Is that something that we could circle back around and take a look at?
Through the chair, Vice Chair Fikes. What was I'm not sure if I was involved in previous.
Yeah, you
was
might
it-
not have,
okay.
now that I'm thinking about it.
Okay.
You were not here, I believe, at the time when we looked at the land use and policy and procedures for abandoned vehicles. That was an extracted code topic that we were taking on as a commission and working. And so my thought was, is I know that Commissioner Halstead has brought it up in the past in his area. He would like to see some kind of enforcement. And again, knowing that staff is shorthanded, obviously that's not what I'm trying to add to that pile. But just to look at moving forward in the new year, how are we taking a look at it as a city? You know, what are we doing with these? Are we just taking collections on taxes, or do we actually have policies to board up windows when it's abandoned? Has it become a health and safety issue? And when it becomes a health and safety issue, what are we doing about it? There are several. I have a list. I have photos.
Mr. Foster? Okay.
Through the chair, Vice Chair Fikes, I'll look into that a bit more. I'm not too familiar with the previous conversations on that. Where would you happen to know around what the time period that might have, and that was at a commission?
Yeah, so when we tackled the comprehensive plan, following that, I believe, was when we were going through a lot of town hall meetings and discussions that came forward that, you know, well, what is the city doing about abandoned vehicles, and what is their process for removal, and, you know, when a homeowner or property owner gets burdened with them, and what's your interpretation of them? Is it just because it has four wheels but one wheel's down? You know, that RV sat there in the exact same spot for 10 years and no movement has occurred, but it's registered, you know, so that line of code changed. And so looking at that same kind of example but applying it towards structures, you know, is there four solid windows and a locking door? Are they all boarded up? Has it become a meth house? Is it a potential meth house? Or, you know, where are we looking down the road as far as, you know, making us the healthiest possible attractive city for everything? But we keep ending up with all these abandoned properties, but all we're doing is collecting taxes on it. You know, how are we adding value to our neighborhoods?
Can you get back to us on the next meeting?
Yes, that's exactly what I was going to ask for. Yeah, let me take a look into that. And
Or
actually,
longer, if it takes you longer.
Giving you a project.
I do have a follow-up question, because so it sounds like the vehicles was an issue, and that code was updated to add additional.
Yes.
Is that correct?
So yes, that was the case. So there was some language and there was some clarification that took place in code to drive the enforcement of complaints, because everything was kind of complaint driven. But then what they found out is once it was complaint driven, then there was a disconnect between legal department and administration, and then law enforcement as far as, you know, can you really send somebody out, or what can you do? And so some of those same things that came out of that process, if we could somehow apply that towards the abandonment. And unfortunately, you are right. Willie was kind of the lead person on that. I forgot. Sorry.
Yeah. I'll take a look at that and bring that back for?
There was others, it'll come to me, because I know Christine and Bob, they were part of that discussion as well.
Ms. Winger.
Thank you. I just wanted to add to that. I have been working with our city attorney on code enforcement. So I know Scott knows Mr. Foster is really busy, and he has actively gone out in my neighborhood on houses that have been left in that almost abandoned state. They've moved out of state. People have started to die. The family aren't taking care of them. They're ultimately boarded up. They put a light on. They call it good. Some had motors and engines and everything else, and it was definitely code enforcement issues. Scott, with leniency, was able to kind of bring the neighborhood together, get it resolved where the property owners paid for a belly dump to come in. The neighborhood went through and they told us, don't mess with anything right here. Everything else can get ditched, and as a neighborhood, we did the work on picking it up and throwing it away. They just facilitated and paid for the dump. So, and that was all done with Scott working with us on code enforcements. We've had a motorhome as well that was broke down that people were living in, and it got removed today. And I know that he had been strongly working on this motorhome issue all through the summer, countless letters. So I do know that Scott is actively working on things that are brought. He has only one guy, and Mr. Foster is only one guy, but they're actively teaming up to work on code enforcement issues. I know that there's other ones. We have a mobile home trailer in our neighborhood that hasn't been lived in. It could probably be condemnable. It has no water, utilities, nothing. It's ultimately... the boards on the windows don't stay boarded up long before another drug addict finds an empty building to utilize. So I know that Scott has those things on his radar, and I know he's been actively working on that. So Mr. Foster's got all these other things, and they're kind of tag teaming it right now. But I think that we do need a better path as far as what we're going to do on these enforcements. Maybe we need to bring someone in part-time that just does the enforcement end of our code, because I mean, we've got a neighbor running that should have a conditional use permit, and they don't have a conditional use permit running their business. So there's a lot of areas, as you've said, that have code enforcement. I guess what I'm saying is I know that they are working on it, and they are working as far as legal on remedying those issues.
Yeah, along those lines, I know that they do temporary enforcement during dip netting season, and that is a good idea possibly as far as suggesting some kind of a seasonal hire person to facilitate some of that. Maybe there's some kind of an internship, much like we do with the seasonal folks that come in on the beach and help out law enforcement. Maybe there's some kind of a position out there that somebody else has done.
Mr. Foster.
Chair, I was just going to say, yeah, because certainly when it comes to the junk vehicles, we administration, we do work together with that, and I feel like actually the code has some good details about what the characteristics of a junk vehicle is. It's like if you're missing, such and such. If you're missing, 2 or more of, if you don't have any wheels, you don't have a windshield, you don't, as well as we work with
10 years. The wheels have not
right, which. And so that's really interesting you say that, and that for me is interesting to hear how that the code got to where it is now. And I'll just say we deal with those. Again, they are complaint driven, unless I'm driving by it and I see it, which does happen, and we need to look into it. But it's largely complaint driven, and we'll work closely with the police department as well, especially when it's in the right of way. So a lot of times that's about once in the right of way, working with the police department to make contact with the owner and get that vehicle moved as quickly as we can, and then when it's on private property, that's usually falls within planning departments purview to be taking a look at our code and seeing if there's a violation, and if so, providing that violation letter and seeing about getting that remedied. And I just say that's something that's it's a regular it's a regular occurrence. We're always working on those. And then that question about abandoning buildings, I'll have a chat and see if there's been any thoughts or discussion on that as well.
It'd be interesting to know if there's still city services to some of them. I know the connection between the street and the water line, and if some of these places get in such disarray, that connection from that property to the water line, is that gonna impact the pressure of other folks in the area, and who's gonna bear the burden of that? So, I mean, as these things go further down, I mean, I'm talking over a 10-year period, I've seen the same structures just get worse and worse and worse. And so if you look at it from a utility standpoint, you know, what is that doing to the rest of the folks in the area? And then what's the burden gonna be for that line for the city?
They should be disposed of. Use that word disposed again, huh?
We had some fire training to do.
Commissioner Dothit.
Speaking of vacant buildings and abandoned buildings, so I just happened to notice when I was here in the last council meeting that it looks like the bowling alley is in foreclosure. I know that's on city lease land. It's going up for deed of sale here on the 21st of December. Have we heard anything on that, or what the plan is going on with that? Any inquiries into that? Nothing?
Through the chair, Commissioner Dothit, I am not familiar with that, but I'll look into it. I'm not sure what that status is. Do you happen to know? Is that transpired recently? Do you have?
It's just on the bulletin board out here.
Okay.
It's by the address. I didn't even know it was the address. I was just happened to see it was going up for foreclosure, and I Googled the address, and that's the bowling alley for failure to pay, let's say, back taxes and stuff. So it's going up for auction. I think it was here on the 21st is what it's going up. So I don't know who's paying the city lease on that, and is there a point when the city lease is not getting paid that the city retains the building then, or how's that work?
Through the chair, Commissioner Dothit, I'd have to check that. I have to look into that. I want to say I didn't think that was a city-owned property. It is. Okay.
Ms. Winger, go ahead.
I was part of working on that to redevelop it into a bowling alley, and my understanding was in council members through executive session, they came back and forgave the tax debt for the buyers to be able to develop it, and then they came back and awarded the land to the bowling alley. So I think that's something more that we would have to check into, because as far as our entity was concerned, that investor that bought the building ended up getting the land as well, and the back tax debt was forgiven. So I think there might need to be a little bit more digging in on that.
I mean, if we gave it to them with the intention of them turning it into a bowling alley with that understanding, and now they've negated that.
They didn't put that condition in that stated that they had to actually develop it and open it back up as a bowling alley. It's kind of the hairy thing with some of our lands weren't given those conditions, like that old gas station at the corner. That's one of the lands too at that same time that they sold the land to them. They didn't make it a condition that it had to be developed or developed in such and such time. So ultimately that little gas station thing could just sit there by Bargain Basement, the old Bargain Basement, the now Little Alaskan. That little gas station building could just sit there. They had no requirements in that land sale to develop or open it or anything like that. And that's one of the areas that the city learned to kind of put those stipulations where those two incidents both kind of happened around the same time.
So with this one, so with the bowling alley, it might be I mean, if they're foreclosing on taxes, don't they have city taxes that are owed on that same building? So couldn't the city look at possibility of reclaiming those with the retention of the property, putting a lien on it essentially? If they have taxes. I'm thinking there's got to be a say, if it's not going to sell and it keeps not selling, the city's owed something for that prime piece of real estate that they're not getting taxes for, obviously also. So I think we might need to dig into it a little bit to see if we can start putting our own request to retain it and maybe use it for city purposes or something, even if it just means bulldozing it and selling the lot for something totally different at this point. I just noticed, like I said, this came up to mind when we were talking about vacant buildings. I saw the foreclosure notice going up for sale again, so.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I just want to add to that, the bowling alley being kind of the Quonset hut, there's just such a limited use of what they could do with that building, unfortunately. So you're right, it's ultimately maybe a fire training activity. I like the sounds of that. So we could just add that to the list. But maybe a fire training activity, bulldoze, it is prime real estate. Unfortunately, I know the intention was originally there. It's just the group that we were working with, the investor that bought it, just the terms and working with them didn't quite work out to further that project. But there was intent on doing it. I think it just kind of broke down with too many different players in on the same thing. But I agree that that's maybe prime, but I just wanted to mention that it's minimal use of what could be done. It's not like you could put more windows or more doorways or anything like that in there. Kind of what you have is what you have. The inside, I've been on the inside just a couple of years ago, ripped out carpet when there was still the intention of putting it into a bowling alley. So even though the facade is caving on the outside, the inside is still, I wouldn't say in good condition, because hasn't been in good condition in a lot of years, but it was probably the same condition it was in when it got closed, or better now that the carpet was taken out. So
I know I spoke briefly with Chief Ross about it, and I know it's one of the things he would like to see go away eventually, but it's just kind of attracting the wrong kind of crowd hanging out there in the summers, and they're having issues with people back behind there, and they're worried about break-ins and that kind of thing. So might be definitely something to see what the city can look into. If we have a tax lien or something we could possibly put on it to maybe get that land back if nobody keeps not buying it, might be something to look into. I just happened to see it on the board there. That's all.
I would just like to add, there's also a abandoned Subaru that's been parked there in front of it for almost 3 months.
Through the chair, I'll take a look at that.
This would be a good time to beg Willie back to work, maybe.
Hire back contract.
I'll be her agent. All right, so I think we walked through the informational items, unless anyone had any questions specifically around that. Next meeting on the 22nd. I was telling Mr. Foster before the meeting tonight, I think as many years as I've been on the commission, I don't think we've ever had that second meeting in December ever. No. So this is a milestone. So, which is good. That means we've got things to do, which is not a bad thing. So, all right, commissioners' comments and questions. Commissioner Woodard.
I'm bringing cookies next time.
Woohoo! I like that. It's on the record, too. Commissioner Dothett.
Thanks for all the hard work
Mel?
we're doing on this. Just like I say, I just got appointed, I guess, to the Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors. So
nice.
Starting in January, I'll be over there, kind of get another view on what's going on with that. So
Wonderful. Good job. Commissioner Greenberg.
Yeah, I don't think I have any.
Vice Chair Fikes.
May not be here on the 22nd.
Delivering gifts?
Santa's sleigh is overflowing.
Well, we will forgive you for sure. I have nothing else to add other than thank Mr. Vice Mayor Glendenning for showing up tonight. Appreciate that. You can
Citizen comments?
opine.
I would just as a teachable moment, we had a commissioner raise a question about a piece of property that is obviously distressed and has a legal status. And thank you, Mr. Foster, for offering to take that forward. I would ask, just as a concerned citizen, that maybe it be part of the city manager's report at the next city council meeting as to the condition of the land, the disposal of the land, and the implications of disposal of that property on our land use, and maybe a little bit of the backstory of that property, so everybody knows. There's a lot of urban legends concerning how it got to be in that situation, how it was sold, and just if we just clear it up a little bit. And thank you.
I bowled 8 strikes in a row there one time.
Sure you did.
Those
True story. True story. True story.
That
Only
was a
time.
long
but
time ago, probably.
That was a long time ago. With my left hand. No. All right, and I have nothing else to add, so business complete. The meeting is adjourned.